to their seats, but you all just sort of instinctively slowly moved to your seats, so thank you for that. My name is Jacob Kane. I'm the city planner for Mount Pleasant. I want to thank everybody. I think I've seen everybody or almost everybody in this room tonight at some point over the last 4 days here at City Hall or downtown for our downtown pub crawl, and I just want to, and some of you multiple times. So I just want to express my appreciation to everybody here, everybody who might watch this video later, anybody who's participated in this process in person or online. This is a collaborative effort, and the plan is only as good as the input we receive. It's been really gratifying to see so many people come forward and be open-minded about new ideas that their fellow citizens have to share, and also to be forward-looking and to be thinking not just about what Mount Pleasant is like today, but what Mount Pleasant could be like next year and 30 years from now in the year 2050. McKenna and Associates have some really exciting results to share with you tonight based on all of the feedback that's been received this week, and we'll continue to have more exciting results of this process as we move forward towards the eventual adoption of a new master plan for the city. So with that, I want to turn things over to Paul Lippens. Paul is our project manager with McKenna and Associates, and he's going to begin walking you through this project. So thank you.
All right, good evening. I definitely want to reiterate Jacob's comments about what a fantastic couple days we've had and how much response we've gotten from the community, how much participation and how much time everyone has given us, and I really appreciate that. The whole process is designed around having the opportunity to collaborate with community members so that any recommendations that come out of the Charrette are based in the community members' wants, needs, and visions for the future. I want to start a little bit just about kind of recapping the process that we went to. Then most of our presentation is going to be focused on the key findings from this week, and we'll wrap up with next steps. I do want to take a brief second. If you've been involved on the consultant team, will you raise your hand so everybody can see? We're joined today by John Jackson, McKenna president, who's going to talk a little bit. And then Wendy Caldwell also joined us today, who's been working on our team, so we're happy that they could come up and help us prepare today. And a big thank you. If you're a city staff member that's been a part of us and been really engaged with our team this whole week, can you raise your hands? And the electeds as well. I just want to give a special thank you for all the people that have really made this a success, so thank you very much. So the Charrette process, we did a kickoff on Monday night, and I introduced the whole process, but it's really designed around feedback loops. So this process involved 3 feedback loops. We started really big with roundtable discussions and getting more broad goals and trying to understand the needs, what was important. We did a fix, keep, and aspire activity around land use. We spent a good time discussing what's important for the vision for the future and the overall goals and objectives. And last night, we also, during that process, toured the sites with community members, toured the city, heard on site about what was really valuable and working in the community, and we did some exploratory design drawings around that. And last night we presented that second feedback loop, which was alternatives. So the first part of this charrette was kind of about generating as many ideas as possible and then presenting all those alternatives last night and getting feedback from everybody on the alternatives. What that went into today was a lot of work on the specific recommendations, and that's what you'll see tonight is kind of feedback from our key findings and the recommendations. So what we'd like to hear is kind of from everyone tonight after our presentation is to help us validate some of the key themes that you hear here tonight and provide us some additional feedback. And that's the third feedback loop. So let's move on to some of the findings. And I do want to point out that we have had good participation online with online surveys. We've received 89 responses this week, And we're keeping these surveys open for another couple weeks. We'd like to close them around April 21st, so I would encourage you and you to have your friends, neighbors, colleagues to go on and take these surveys online, because we'll continue to accept results and comments from what you hear. But what did we hear? So presenting some high points from the vision that, you know, Mount Pleasant, and this goes along with the city's Meet Here campaign, which is, this is a regional destination, and it's a central city in the state. And it's important not just to Mount Pleasant community, but to the region. That the park system, the vital park system, is really the spine of the whole city, and it's a gem that is not just a gem to Mount Pleasant community, but to the region as well. And that as Mount Pleasant transitions and finds new vision for land use and transportation, that essential link to the park system is really important. And that, you know, good jobs, biking, walkable city, a place that is really designed for people. I should have highlighted here the important participation we also got from CMU planners, who attended several sessions and actually participated for half the day today as we worked through future land use visioning. And that role, as well as MDOT planners who participated, was really key to having some recommendations or findings that we can present that have been vetted through multiple agencies. You know, mentioning that the parks are really important, we wanted to provide some synthesis on some of the major park themes. We do think that many of the objectives that were expressed up here were certainly validated, but as you know, you can even see, if you look at the Exceptional Parks and Public Space Board, we got a lot of feedback specifically on parks throughout this event. But as I mentioned, the parks are important. The key feature of the parks is the river. So we did hear a lot about improved river access and continued celebration of the river as a part of what's going to be important to the city moving forward. And that part of this is about multimodal connections. Walkability came up a lot, walkability to and from campus, creating crossings on Mission Street to connect the east and west sides of the city, and connecting into the trail system and on into regional trails was a theme that really arose almost in every single session we did. And then, you know, I've mentioned the regional connection, but also within the park system, there was a talk about improving the amount of assets on the east side of the city as well. So we did ask for validation on community goals, and what we heard from the community about the top objectives that should be pursued, we kind of wanted to share that. So within the sustainable land use objective, the top objective that we heard from residents was encouraging greater variety and mixed use of housing types within neighborhoods that provide opportunities for assisted living, downsizing, family, students, and first-time home buyers. So this is really an objective that supports diversity of housing stock, and including what planners call missing middle housing into that housing stock. And you know, that's housing sizes between your single family and your large apartment buildings. That more variety was really highly desired. Another objective that received a lot of votes, encouraging redevelopment that locates people within walkable, bikeable distances from essential services, jobs, and recreation. So putting people where the key places in the city were, and encouraging retrofit to land uses that addressed kind of a spatial mismatch as much as possible was a key important objective that we heard from residents. Connected mobility systems. Top objective, retrofitting the roadway network to provide accommodations for pedestrians and bicyclists, which I've kind of already mentioned as part of the parks themes as well, and partnering with MDOT and CMU to reimagine Mission Street as a vital district front door to the community and the university. I would say that that partnership was alive and well this week in the productive conversations we had with both agencies about the the corridor, and we really heard some shared vision in what all agencies wanted to see, which was reassuring. Focused redevelopment. Some key objectives for focused redevelopment: promoting economic vitality along Mission Street, commercial corridor consistent with the city's form-based code and aesthetic values. I will say that it was, part of the charrette was exploring alternatives and considering alternatives that might have led that form-based code in a slightly different direction. But as we worked through it, the form-based code was really verified in our outreach, and there's a dedication to the vision that code created for particularly the Mission Street corridor, and I thought that was also noted by how people voted for these objectives. Promoting a vital mix of businesses and uses within the downtown, including uses that have flexible hours of operation, provide entertainment and events. So, continuing to support downtown as the vital, active, healthy center of the city, and I thought that was an important objective to note as well. For parks and public spaces, 39 votes for developing citywide bike, hike, and path systems to connect the parks to neighborhoods, CMU, downtown Mission Street, and regional pathways. So, this theme is continuing to come out, the importance of that multimodal system to the health of the city. And then improving and supporting river access and stewardship, also, rising to the top of residents' objectives. And then innovative services, enhancing and improving employment opportunities and training for higher paying non-service sector jobs. So creating job access is a continued goal for the city. And improving neighborhood services, encouraging the creation of neighborhood organizations to strengthen the relationship between the city, local neighborhoods, CMU, and its students. So continuing to work on community collaboration and well-being. So those are kind of our findings from the roundtable discussion and the overall priorities for the city. We also did a lot of work on design and visioning, specifically trying to focus on 3 areas. We focused on the Mission Street, one of the primary nodes or intensity areas, change areas on Mission Street. We looked at the town center site, which has been studied a lot to try and see if there was a good preferred solution for reimagining the town center site. And then we looked at where Main Street intersects with Pickard to try and get some visioning for that spot. And, like I said, we worked through a lot of different ideas. These sessions were done with MDOT participating, with CMU participating, and many residents and stakeholders as well. And we also kind of conducted a form and urban design analysis for each area to kind of determine where the A streets were, where the B streets were. What type of a block system do you really need to create the type of walkable environment we're hearing people wanted, and in what case, where does the block need to be retrofitted? And I think that, these diagrams, see on the upper left, that is kind of the figure ground. That's what is there today. So you see the street and the buildings are fairly far apart, and they're not interconnected. So there's no real connectivity at that intersection for walking or biking. And then the diagram on the right shows walkable blocks. So a good pedestrian network has access every 300 to 600 feet in order to create places where people want to walk. And your downtown is a great example of a block size that's very walkable. You walk around because there's access and connectivity. So, and then if you do want a walkable block size, how do you actually have to make that an interesting place by filling in, new buildings, new activities, new streetscape? And this analysis goes behind and informs some of the designs that you see. So we worked through some ideas, and eventually, through talking with resident participation and doing a pinup and talking about all the concepts and alternatives, developed a preferred vision. And I was somewhat surprised to see there was broad consensus around this idea of creating roundabouts at the core intersections for many of Mission Street's intersections, and that was supported by CMU and also by MDOT. I think that this became a feasible alternative. So we have some of the key things that we found. Roundabouts were a good idea for traffic management, but also for helping to create pedestrian crossings and addressing that a change needed to happen. Landscape medians for visual enhancement, traffic control, utilizing and retrofitting the existing street grid, access management along driveways, controlling driveways so they're safer for walkability, taking advantage of underutilized parking lots for infill development, and new parking lots located behind the buildings, the residential front door to CMU. The town center site. So we worked through a lot of ideas for town center, really wanted to present some alternatives. This one looked at creating a farm market, but not a farmer's market, a kind of a permanent indoor farm market. We did the same kind of block analysis here, and I think what you'll notice is that this is downtown, and really there isn't a whole lot of grid retrofit that's required here because the grid is really nice. It really is walkable. So you'll see that the solution we evaluated was how to really create a functioning and meaningful public space for activity in downtown. And we came up with this preferred plan, which really changes the focus from parking on this site to an active and softened green space with still some hardscape features. We also heard that there's a need for more housing downtown, and of course the current senior apartments or low-income apartments, assisted income apartments are complementary to new housing. So the thought was that we could kind of give that an updated look by infilling new housing along the site and continue to address that important need in downtown and also do that facing this public park, which would make it a really nice place to live and provide more housing really in proximity to the best part of downtown. So we worked today too on kind of providing a visual rendering of what that would look like if you're standing on the corner of Main Street and Broadway. You know, you can see the current apartment building kind of peeking over this new row of housing that retrofits that corner. Certainly a lot more pleasant to look at than the parking, and it would provide the city with an opportunity to put in a new pedestrian street system and really make it more walkable. And also, you know, connect to this wonderful City Hall building and the potential new developments and extension of downtown to the west. So this is, you know, really a key development for downtown. And, you know, the features, expanding the public gathering space at Main and Broadway, providing flexible event programming options, new on-street parking, direct connections to Island Park via trail and pedestrian bridge, so making Island Park work and connect more into downtown. Additional residential frontage on the public space, and integrating the Riverview apartments into downtown. And then finally, we looked at Pickard Street. We were really we spent some time evaluating the industrial area north of Pickard and how it integrates and interfaces with the residential neighborhood above. And you know, what we actually realized here is that it's, you know, relatively informal, but a fairly decent block system exists in that residential area. And that we really liked it. We heard from a lot of residents about just how well that space worked as a maker space and opportunity for entrepreneurship and supporting a real do-it-yourself environment. And you know, we walked the whole area, and you know, everybody really likes it. And so we thought, this is actually, you know, pretty good. How can we do some stuff here to make it interesting and to make it kind of the pride of the city? And where we focused on is really how the Main Street and Pickard intersection is a key gateway for downtown. So the idea was to create a gateway feature, and then using some mixed-use development on the north side and some underused sites, we could actually also improve that as a place and an entrance on the north side of downtown and help to bridge that industrial area and plan the way it would interface with the neighborhood effectively. So this development featured improved aesthetics and safety with landscaping reconfiguration to a 3-lane cross-section, improving gateway features to downtown at Main Street, recognizing and working with the existing industrial district to continue support entrepreneurship and creation of job opportunities, and adding supportive uses at Main and Pickard as a transition to downtown and the residential neighborhoods to the south. So those are kind of the primary findings from these land use and visioning studies. We also spent most of our time today thinking on the broad system, so we wanted to take what we learned through studying these places and apply them to the city. And one of the main jobs of the master plan is to provide policy guidance citywide on what the land use vision is for the future and what the transportation vision is for the future. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this map here on the right. And that was kind of the plan for the future transportation system. So some of the key things that we heard was this connection between CMU and downtown, and the prominence that university really has in that system as the access between some key features on campus and the central mall on campus and the view terminus in downtown. And we also did some work on, and we're somewhat surprised that there was broad support for the rerouting of M20 west of town on Lincoln up to Pickard. And this was something that we heard when we talked to the residents who actually, or business owners who worked in the industrial area, really supported this idea as well. So this is a concept that had broad support. So we developed a typology map that includes a plan for developing multimodal system corridors that would support biking and walking, and also place an emphasis on the function and the form that these roadways should continue and take within that system. So really, Mission Street and Pickard, east of Mission Street, are your boulevards and your thoroughfares, your wider streets that still need to support multimodal activity and particularly crossings. And your avenues are mostly east-west, with Pickard west of Mission and High Street and Broomfield on the south. And then between that, you have a system that mostly is connecting north and south, but there are some east and west streets of local connectors that really make that street work, the system work as well. And we've done some preliminary thinking on how the multimodal accommodations should be distributed or supported within each of those typologies, and there are some cross sections there to review in some detail. But the idea with the system of shared youth pass, share rows, which the city already has these in various places, and bike lanes, you can choose the right treatment for the street and try to, in a low-cost way, achieve a full connected system. And then I'm actually going to hand it off to John Jackson, who's going to take the reins here and describe the process that we went through to create a proposed 2019 future land use map and some of our next steps. So thank you, John.
Thank you, Paul. It's been a real pleasure to spend the last few days here in Mount Pleasant. It's clear that everyone who participated over the last few days is very passionate, cares deeply about what happens in this community. And we really tried to respect that as we went through all these design iterations, all the transportation alternatives that we talked about, and then also today when we were wrestling with the land uses. So I want to talk a little bit about the process for how the master plan relates to the zoning ordinance. How many people here in this room participated in the development of the form-based code? Okay, fresh in your minds, right? Not that long ago. So what the heck are we doing here, with this future land use stuff? So here's the deal. The state requires a city to have a master plan in place if they're going to have a zoning ordinance. And they really like the master plan to support the zoning ordinance and be consistent with the provisions that are in the zoning ordinance. So that's the reason why we're going through this process of updating the master plan to make sure it really supports what's in your recently adopted form-based code. And as Paul said earlier, a lot of what we found out today and through the last couple of days is that the concepts that you talked about are extremely valid, still applicable, and will serve you well moving forward. But a couple of differences between the master plan and the zoning ordinance. Number one is the master plan is not a legal document. It looks long range. It's guidelines. It provides sort of a higher elevation view of what the community wants, what its vision is, whereas the zoning ordinance is what you can do on a piece of property today. It's a legal document, tells you what you can and can't do. I mentioned that it's a guideline, basically. It's a policy document. It includes more than just zoning. Zoning is only one way to implement the master plan. The master plan will also provide guidance to the city when they're considering investing in road improvements, park improvements, all kinds of capital improvements that the city considers moving forward. They'll refer back to this master plan to determine whether or not they should make those investments. So those are some of the differences between the master plan and the zoning ordinance. So again, this master plan takes a broader view of the city. It addresses other tools, how to get grants, helping the city get grants to make some of these improvements that we're talking about and considering, and provides a lot bigger resource to the city in addition to the master plan. So I mentioned that as we looked at the future land use plan, we wanted to make sure that it supported the recently adopted and implemented form-based code. So we used similar language when we were looking at the different land use districts, mixed use districts, flexible uses within those districts, that sort of thing. And we also respected the fact that there are a couple of very specific and special districts here in the community, including the campus and the industrial areas. So those things basically reflect the effort that went into the recent form-based code. So as we were looking at the future land use options, and we looked at the future land use options with two groups of people today, and we both sat down at two different tables and came up with two separate future land use plans, okay? And we thought, okay, let's go through this process, and then after that we'll get together and come up with a synthesis plan. We'll identify what was different in each of the plans and what was similar, and we'll come up with a synthesis plan. And we figured that would maybe take, I don't know, 3 hours or so. Ended up taking 5 hours. So we looked at a lot of details because we wanted to get it right. We wanted to listen to what people had to say. We looked at all the comments that came out over the last couple of days to make sure that we got it right. And this isn't the final plan either. There'll be opportunities, more opportunities, and I'll talk about that in a second, for more public input in refining the plan. These are just some of the things up on the slide here that Paul already mentioned. Obviously it's based on significant public input, supports the form-based code. Clearly, people value the single-family neighborhoods in the community. That came up time and time again, making sure that we were protecting and preserving those great walkable neighborhoods, making sure they were sustainable in the long term. People obviously wanted to see something great happen along Mission Street, reimagining what the opportunities are. How can we generate some economic vitality and take advantage of some of the opportunities there? Paul talked a lot about the roads, making them more suitable for people walking and riding their bikes. All these things went into considerations about appropriate distribution of land uses, appropriate relationship of land uses, and things of that nature. promoting job opportunities in tourism. How can we take advantage of some of the assets that the city already has to generate some great economic opportunities? Obviously, downtown is one of the core assets of the community, so that came up time and time again. Is how can we develop an appropriate mix of land uses for the downtown to make sure that it continues to grow and thrive? And again, Paul mentioned earlier the importance of the green infrastructure that you have in the city, the park spaces, the public spaces, and how all those can be knitted together to strengthen them and make them an even more tremendous asset to the community. So I mentioned that we developed districts that basically reflected what was in the form-based code. We have a single-family residential district. We have the attached residential district, which could include types of developments such as townhouses, duplexes, some smaller scale, missing middle housing, as Paul called it. That could be great as a transition land use. It could be great on the edge of neighborhoods, a great way to provide alternative forms of housing, which is something that we heard over and over again in the comments. Mixed use, low density, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Mixed use, medium density, mixed use, high density. Obviously, the parks and the public spaces in the community provided a main element to the future land use, and then the two special districts that I mentioned earlier, industrial and campus. Single family, pretty self-explanatory. You've got great residential neighborhoods with a variety of housing values and housing types. And that's definitely something that everyone was very anxious to maintain. This is an example of what some of the attached residential might look like, smaller scale. We're not talking about large scale apartment complexes here. We're talking about ones that could fit and be compatible with areas within existing residential neighborhoods. Here's the future land use plan itself. This is the synthesis plan. And I was glad to see a lot of people got up and looked at this plan earlier today. But you can see a couple of things I want to point out. The industrial areas primarily stayed intact. The campus area, again, not a lot of changes there, stayed pretty much intact. But as you look on Mission Street, that was an area where we really saw opportunities for increased critical mass, trying to attract some exciting development at the south end of Mission Street. And I know it's a long way up there, but you can see the purple on the west side of Mission Street is intended to be higher density mixed use development up to 5 stories. So we're talking about really putting a charge into Mission Street in terms of what it looks like, what kind of activity can be supported there, and we feel that it's appropriate given the relationship to CMU, appropriate given the fact that it's not directly adjacent to other single-family residential. So this was an area where we really felt that we could do some exciting things that we have shown up here on these design boards. Obviously, the downtown is another area where we see the opportunity for increasing critical mass. So again, we looked at that being one of the higher density areas in the community with the higher density mixed use designation. We also looked at other areas on Mission Street where it was adjacent to single family with shallower lots, and we said, okay, we want to allow a mix of uses here, which means you might have a small apartment building next to a retail development. That's what we're talking about with mixed use in the red areas along Mission Street and some of the other corridors. So smaller scale, so we're talking about 1 to 2 story buildings in the mixed use areas, but still providing a mix of walkable uses close to each other. Then we had the medium density mixed use district, which is sort of the blue areas. And that again was intended to provide some transitions from the higher density areas that we designated to the lower density commercial areas, and also sensitive to the adjacent proximity to residential areas. And these blue areas we anticipate as mixed uses ranging from 2.5 to 4 stories in height. So that's the kind of scale that we're talking about along some of these major corridors and some of these redevelopment sites. Some of the other redevelopment sites that we looked at were not just along the corridors and in these typical areas we looked at. But we also wanted to think about, okay, what happens in some of these big box locations that have way more parking than they need? What are the opportunities for us to, again, create value through this planning process for these properties in the city? So that's some of the areas that you see colored in the blue. Then, again, the attached residential area, you can see that's in the orange. And those are areas that we saw opportunities for providing different housing types close to other residential areas, single-family areas, also close to parks that, again, could add value to people living in duplexes or townhouses, would gain value from living close to parks. They wouldn't have their own open space, but they'd have close location next to the city's public open spaces. So that was kind of the rationale that went into the location of some of those orange areas. And of course you see a ton of green on this map. I mentioned green infrastructure, and that's really what we're talking about, connecting all these parks and public spaces along the rivers, making sure that people have access to those from the residential areas, easily walkable, bikeable, and making sure those connections are emphasized and we have the right location of land uses. You see the industrial areas here in the brown at the north end, as well as in the sort of the southeast portion of the community. Paul talked a little bit about the area in the north end being sort of a eclectic mix of uses, and we wanted to make sure that we respected that unique identity as ways of promoting future industrial development. Here are some other examples of what these land uses might look like. On the left, you see sort of low-scale mixed-use development. You might have these kind of corner stores right next to townhouses or small-scale or residential buildings. You see the higher-scale mixed-use buildings, which might be 2 to 3 stories in height. And then finally, I took a picture of the downtown area. That's the kind of intensity, but that would be allowed up to 5 stories. So we're really talking about promoting a critical mass of infill development in these key areas of the town. Of course, we all know what these parks look like and how valuable they are, but they come in all different sizes and shapes. We have pocket parks, playgrounds, large passive open spaces, and we want to make sure that people have access to the right types of land uses. And again, here are some images of what the development might be in the campus and industrial areas. This is a nice one on the left for the industrial and an office park or industrial park, but it might look a little different in the area north of town. So where do we go from here? Again, we got a lot of great input over the last few days, but we want to talk about where we go from here. And we're going to be around after this to have more dialogue tonight, so we'd be happy to hear your questions afterwards. But we want to make sure people still know that they can take the survey through April. I think we already had, how many responses did we have? 89 or 86? So we've already gotten a lot of input, and we need more. So tell your friends and neighbors to vote and get involved, because this is your plan, so we need to get your input on that. We're going to continue working on the plan through August, refining it, looking at public feedback, testing it with the city, making sure we're on the right track and getting what people want to see here. We're going to reach out to the Planning Commission, City Commission, and Parks Commission through October, so that's sort of the vetting process, continue to refine it. Then we're going to ask them through that process for permission to distribute it to surrounding communities and the county to make sure that we get feedback from your neighbors. A lot of these projects, the road projects, parks projects, trails, all involve regional efforts. So it's important to get them involved with these projects as well. So we're shooting for the Planning Commission public hearing to be in the winter of 2020. I'd say what? 2019, right? I'm sorry, yes, exactly, 2019. 2019. And then adoption in the spring of 2020. So yeah, this isn't going to go on that long, I promise. So that's really the next steps. And again, I want to thank everyone for coming out tonight, and I encourage you to stay involved and keep providing us your feedback. It's your plan, and it's you know, we really need your buy-in. So thank you very much for your attention tonight, and happy to answer any questions.